Snow was falling over a forgotten mansion in Vermont. A retired Navy sailor came there with nothing but old tools, quiet grief, and his German shepherd. The town thought Whitcomb House was only a burden no sane man would keep. But beneath its cracked greenhouse, Marlow found something that had waited through decades of winter.
Just take it easy.
Not just a violin worth a fortune, but a voice someone had hidden from the world. And Warren would have to decide whether to sell it or let its song heal the people it was meant to reach. If this story touches you, tell us where you're watching from, and please like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers and keep these stories coming. Warren Hale arrived in Alder Creek on a Thursday afternoon when the snow was falling softly enough to seem harmless. It came down in clean white sheets over the roofs, over the pine branches, over the narrow road that curved along the frozen lake. The town looked almost too still from the window of his old pickup, like a place sealed inside a snow globe and forgotten on a shelf. Smoke lifted from brick chimneys. A few porch lights glowed, though it was not yet evening. Beyond the last row of houses, Lake Alder lay under a skin of ice, dull silver beneath the winter sky. Warren slowed as he passed the town sign. Alder Creek, Vermont, 1846. The letters were half covered with frost. Beside him, Marlow lifted his head. The German shepherd had been dozing with his muzzle resting near Warren's coat sleeve, but the change in speed woke him. His ears rose, though the left one tilted slightly outward the way it always did when he was trying to understand something. His coat was black across the back, like an old saddle, gold along the chest and legs, with gray starting to show beneath his chin. "You see it?" Warren murmured. Marlow looked through the windshield at the snowy road ahead. Warren almost smiled. "Yeah, me too." He did not mean the town. Not exactly. He meant the quiet. After 37 years of noise, engines, radios, steel decks, harbor alarms, storms hitting the side of a vessel like fists, quiet had become suspicious to him. It was never empty. It always carried something underneath. A shift in pressure, a loose cable, a man trying not to breathe too loudly in the dark. Even now, retired at 59, Warren still listened like someone waiting for the next order. But no order came, only the tires pressing softly into snow. He drove with both hands on the wheel, shoulders broad beneath an old charcoal field jacket. Under it, the olive-drab body of his combat shirt fit close to him, the camouflage sleeves faded at the elbows, horizontal bands across the upper arms worn pale from years of use. It was not a uniform anymore. He wore it the way another man might wear a flannel shirt, because it still held together, because it still felt honest, because he had never learned how to dress like someone who belonged nowhere in particular. His hair, dark brown once, had gone silver at both temples. He kept it short, but not military short. A few days of gray stubble roughened his jaw. His face had the kind of weathering that did not come from age alone. Sun, salt, bad sleep, things carried too long without being spoken. The pickup rolled past the post office, a small hardware store, a church with a white steeple, and then the diner. There were 3 men standing outside under the striped awning, hands around coffee cups, coats zipped to their throats. All 3 turned to watch him pass. Warren did not blame them. A stranger in a winter town was always a question. A stranger with a retired working dog and a truck bed full of tools was an answer nobody had asked for. The real estate office sat 2 doors down from the diner, but the paperwork was already done. He had signed the final pages that morning at the county building an hour away, in a room that smelled of copier toner and wet wool. The county clerk had looked at him twice before handing over the keys. "You understand the exterior preservation clause?" she had asked. "I do." "And the winter access issue?" "I do." and the heating system has not been certified since 2009. I read it. She had paused then, pen hovering. Mr. Hale, I have to say this because I say it to everyone. This property has failed 4 prior bids. Warren had looked at the folder between them. 4 prior bidders. 4 men or companies who had seen the price, seen the land, imagined profit, restoration, charm, and then discovered what the house truly demanded. The roof alone could bankrupt a hopeful person. The road could vanish under snow for days. The greenhouse was a liability. The wiring was a rumor. And because Whitcomb House had been listed under local historic protection, nobody could tear it down and build something clean, square, and profitable in its place. I'm not buying it to flip, Warren had said. The clerk had studied him with tired, kind eyes. That may be the only reason you have a chance. Now the keys sat heavy in his coat pocket. Marlow shifted beside him, his injured left shoulder stiff after the long drive. Warren noticed the small movement immediately. He reached over and touched the dog's neck, fingers brushing the worn leather collar and the scratched silver tag. Almost there, old man. Marlow gave a quiet breath through his nose. The road bent upward past the last houses. Alder Creek fell behind them in layers. Diner windows, snow-covered porches, a row of mailboxes leaning under white caps. Ahead, the hill rose through pines. And then Warren saw it. Whitcomb House stood above the lake with its back to the dark trees and its face toward the frozen water. It was larger than the photographs had suggested, not grand in a polished way, grand like something that had refused to fall down out of stubbornness. 3 stories of pale, weathered clapboard, stone foundation, tall windows, a wraparound porch sagging at one corner, and a narrow tower on the east side with glass panes catching the gray light. Snow gathered along the roof lines. The old greenhouse hunched behind it, broken ribs visible under a crust of ice. For a moment, Warren did not move. The house looked tired. That was the first honest thought he had. Not haunted, not cursed, not majestic. Tired. Like a ship brought into harbor after storms nobody had recorded. Marlow pressed his nose toward the cracked open window. His ears lifted again. Warren turned off the engine. Silence settled around them. It was interrupted only by the faint ticking of the cooling truck and the soft tap of snow against the windshield. Well, Warren said quietly, there she is. Marlow did not wag his tail. That made Warren look at him. The dog was staring at the house, not tense, not fearful, just focused. Warren had seen that look in ports after accidents, in warehouses after floods, in collapsed structures where men insisted there was nothing left to find. Marlow did not bark when something mattered. He listened. Warren got out first. Cold air struck his face, clean and sharp. He came around the truck, opened the passenger door, and waited while Marlow climbed down carefully. The dog landed well but favored the left shoulder for one step before correcting himself. Warren pretended not to notice. Marlow hated pity more than most men Warren had known. They climbed the porch steps together. The wood complained under Warren's boots. He stopped at the door, pulled the keys from his pocket, and found the old brass one. Before he put it in the lock, he looked back at the road below. Alder Creek was mostly hidden by snowfall now, though he could still see the faint glow of the diner. That was where he had stopped before coming up the hill. The woman behind the counter had introduced herself as Mabel Price without offering her hand. She was in her 60s, sturdy, with a carpenter's shoulders and a face that looked carved by winter and work. A folded measuring rule stuck from the pocket of her canvas coat. She had watched him drink black coffee, watched Marlow lie under the stool, and then said what everyone else in the room had been thinking. "You bought the Whitcomb place." Warren had nodded. Mabel had wiped the counter slowly. "You got help?" "Some." "That means no." A man in the corner had snorted into his mug, but not cruelly. More like he had heard this story before and already knew the ending. Warren had looked at Mabel. "You know the house?" "I know what it does to people who think old wood is the same as character." That had earned a small laugh from the room. Warren had waited. Mabel studied him the way builders studied walls, looking for the hidden crack. "That house doesn't need a dreamer, Mr. Hale. It needs somebody stubborn enough to stay after the first pipe bursts, the first roof bill comes in, and the first night the wind starts talking through the tower." "Good," Warren had said. "I'm not much of a dreamer." For the first time, Mabel had almost smiled. "Then maybe you'll last till February." Now, standing on the porch of the house nobody wanted, Warren understood that she had not been trying to scare him away. She had been measuring him. He turned the key. The lock resisted, then gave with a dry metallic click. The door opened into cold air and dust. Warren stepped inside. The entry hall smelled of old wood, plaster, ashes long dead in the fireplace, and the faint mineral dampness of a house that had survived too many winters without heat. Light entered through tall windows veiled in grime. Dust lay over the floorboards in soft gray layers. To the left, a parlor opened into darkness. To the right, the dining room stood with its chairs gone and a long, pale mark on the wallpaper where a cabinet must once have been. Straight ahead, the staircase rose toward the second floor. Marlow entered behind him and stopped. Warren heard the pause more than saw it. He looked down. The dog stood just inside the threshold, body still, head lifted toward the staircase. His ears were forward, his breathing slowed. "Marlow." The dog did not move. Warren followed his gaze upward. Nothing. Only the stairs, the landing, the dim line of the upper hallway. Old houses made sounds. Warren knew that. Wood shrank in cold. Pipes clicked. Snow slid against siding. A place like this would be full of noises that meant nothing. Still, he waited. Marlow took one step forward, then another, and stopped at the foot of the stairs. Not afraid. Listening. A thin unease moved through Warren, but it was not the sharp warning of danger. It was softer than that. Sadder. Like walking into a room after an argument had ended years ago and feeling the words still hanging there. Warren removed his glove and rested his hand on the newel post. The wood was cold under his palm. "We're not here to fight ghosts," he said. Marlow glanced back at him. Warren gave a breath that was almost a laugh. "I know. You don't believe in ghosts." The house answered with a faint creak from somewhere above. Warren did not move toward it. Not yet. There were practical things to do before dark. He brought in the first load from the truck, a duffel, 2 boxes of tools, a sleeping roll, dog food, bottled water, a camp stove, and a stack of wool blankets. The heat would not be working that night. The electricity, according to the inspector's report, existed in a philosophical sense. Warren had arranged for repairs to begin the following week, if weather allowed, which in Vermont meant if the sky felt generous. By late afternoon, he had cleared enough space in the main room to make camp. The fireplace took work. The flue was stiff, the old ashes damp at the bottom, and Warren checked everything twice before trusting it. He built a small fire first, patient and careful, feeding it kindling until the flame caught. Light moved across the room, revealing empty frames, cracked plaster, and a ceiling medallion almost hidden under dust. Marlow lay near the hearth for a while, but not fully asleep. His eyes remained half open, following Warren from box to window to door. "You can rest," Warren told him. Marlow's tail moved once against the floor. Warren sat on an overturned crate and ate beans from a tin warmed over the camp stove. Marlow had his food from a metal bowl. Outside, snow thickened until the windows became pale squares, the world beyond erased. For the first time all day, Warren allowed himself to feel how tired he was. Not from the drive, not from the cold, from choosing. Men talked about retirement like it was a door into peace. For Warren, it had felt more like stepping off a ship before learning whether the ground would hold. The Navy had given him structure, rank, purpose, a place to put grief where it would not interrupt the work. Then one morning, after the last ceremony, the last handshake, the last polite thank you, he had found himself standing in a parking lot with Marlow beside him, and nowhere he had to be. That had frightened him more than he liked to admit. So he bought a house too broken to leave him idle. He bought a winter hill, a failing roof, a dead furnace, a preservation clause, a road that might disappear under snow. He bought a reason to wake up and put his hands to something. Across the room, Marlow rose. Warren looked over. The dog had been lying with his chin on his paws. Now he stood facing the staircase again. The fire snapped behind Warren. Marlow? No growl, no bark. The German shepherd walked slowly to the foot of the stairs and stopped in the exact place he had stopped before. Warren set the tin aside. The room seemed to grow quieter around them. Even the wind outside softened for a second, or maybe Warren only imagined it. Marlow lifted his head toward the second floor. His left ear tilted outward. His body stayed calm, but every line of him was attentive. Warren stood. He did not reach for a weapon. There was none to reach for. That life was supposed to be behind him. Instead, he crossed the room with slow steps and stopped beside the dog. Together they looked up the staircase. The darkness above held its place. Warren could smell smoke from the fire, dust warming in the room, wet wool from his coat, the clean animal scent of Marlow beside him. Nothing else. And yet, for the first time since signing the papers, Warren felt certain that buying Whitcomb House had not been only a decision he had made. It had been an answer to something waiting. He placed a hand lightly between Marlow's shoulders. "Tomorrow," he said. Marlow did not look away. Warren kept his hand there a moment longer. Outside, snow fell brighter against the black windows. Inside, the old house settled around them with a long, low sigh. Warren did not know whether the people in Alder Creek were right to pity him, or whether Mabel Price had seen something in him worth testing. He did not know if he had bought a burden, a shelter, or the last foolish project of a man who did not know how to be finished. He only knew that Marlow was listening. And in all their years together, Warren had learned one rule above most others. When Marlow listened, Warren stayed. By the third morning, Whitcomb House had stopped feeling like a purchase and started behaving like an argument. The pipes knocked behind the walls before dawn. A strip of plaster came loose in the upstairs hallway and fell without warning. The front door stuck whenever the temperature dropped, then swung too freely when the fire warmed the entry. Every repair Warren touched revealed two more waiting beneath it, as if the house had learned to hide its wounds under paint, dust, and pride. He did not resent it, not yet. There was something familiar in the way the house resisted help. Warren woke before sunrise, as he always did, and stood in the main room with a tin mug of coffee warming his hands. Outside, snow drifted down in slow, patient flakes. The lake below the hill was hidden behind a white morning haze. In the hearth, the fire had burned low, its last coals breathing dull orange beneath ash. Marlow lay on the rug Warren had brought from the truck, but he was awake. His amber eyes followed Warren in silence. "You know," Warren said, looking at a water stain spreading across the ceiling, "I was told retirement would involve less structural failure." Marlow blinked once. "That's what I thought." A little after 8, tires crunched up the snowy drive. Warren stepped onto the porch just as Mabel Price climbed out of an old green work van with a dented side panel and a ladder strapped to the roof. She wore a brown canvas coat, a mustard wool hat pulled low, and gloves with the fingertips cut off. A folding wooden ruler stuck from one pocket like an old habit. She looked at the house before she looked at Warren. "That porch corner's worse than it was last fall," she said. "Good morning to you, too," Mabel grunted. "Morning's implied if nobody's dead." Behind her, a second vehicle came up the hill, a white roofing truck with mud frozen along the wheel wells. The driver got out slowly, as if he regretted having accepted the job before his boots touched the snow. He was younger than Warren, early 40s, lean in the way of men who spent their lives climbing and balancing instead of lifting weights. His face was wind-reddened, his beard short and uneven, his dark blonde hair crushed under a black knit cap. He carried a roof hammer at his belt, the wood handle polished with use. "Jonas Bell," Mabel said without ceremony. "Best roof man around when he's not being difficult." Jonas did not smile. "That's my professional description now?" "It's the polite one." Warren offered his hand. "Warren Hale." Jonas looked at the hand for half a beat before taking it. His grip was firm, quick, and not especially welcoming. "Everyone knows," Jonas said. There was no insult in it, but there was no warmth either. Marlow came to the doorway and stood beside Warren, tall and quiet. Jonas noticed him at once. Most people did. The dog's black and gold coat caught the gray daylight, and the old leather collar at his neck looked almost as worn as the house itself. "Does he bite?" Jonas asked. "Only when conversation gets lazy," Warren said. Mabel laughed once, sharp and surprised. Jonas gave Warren a look that might have become a smile if it had trusted itself. Then he glanced back up at the roof. "We should start with the east slope. If that goes under another heavy snow, your upstairs gets a skylight you didn't ask for." They worked in layers. Mabel began inside, testing floorboards, tapping walls with her knuckles, listening to the house as if it might confess under the right pressure. Jonas climbed to the roof with a rope line and moved along the shingles with careful efficiency. Warren hauled debris, cleared old furniture, and carried boards from room to room. The cold made every tool bite into his hands, even through gloves. By mid-morning, the main parlor had become a battlefield of dust sheets, stacked wood, cracked molding, and old wallpaper curling away from the walls. Yet beneath the decay, beauty kept appearing. A strip of carved oak under the stair rail, a brass vent cover shaped like ivy leaves, the blue stone of the fireplace hidden beneath soot, deepening in color when Mabel wiped it with a wet rag. Warren found himself slowing, despite the work waiting. He had expected rot, bills, and cold. He had not expected craftsmanship. Not this much of it. Someone had once cared for every edge of this place. Mabel saw him studying the mantel. "Don't fall in love with it," she said. "I'm trying not to." "That's how it gets you." He looked at her. She shrugged. "People come in thinking old houses are honest because they're old. They're not. They lie like everything else. They just do it prettier." From above came a dull thump, then Jonas calling through a broken section of ceiling, "Found another leak path." Mabel tilted her head upward. "Of course you did." They ate lunch in the kitchen because it had the least falling plaster. Warren set out sandwiches from the diner, coffee in a thermos, and a bowl of water for Marlow. Mabel sat on an overturned bucket without complaint. Jonas stood by the window, eating with one hand, looking out toward the greenhouse and the snow-dimmed trees beyond it. "You worked here before?" Warren asked him. Jonas chewed slowly. "On the roof, a couple years back, before the county stops trying to patch it." "Family from here?" "Everybody's family is from here until they get smart." Mabel gave him a look. Jonas ignored it, but his jaw tightened. "My grandfather worked this house too, back when there were still Whitcombs around to hand out orders."
Warren waited. He had learned long ago that some men kept speaking if you did not rush them. "He repaired the west porch after the big ice storm in '68, Jonas said. "Rebuilt half the service stairs."
Never got paid in full.
Mabel looked down at her coffee. Warren said, "I didn't know that."
No reason you would.
Jonas's voice stayed level, but something under it had hardened. People liked the story of this place better without the invoices. The words settled into the kitchen. Outside, snow slid from a pine branch and landed softly against the glass. Warren did not defend the house. It would have been foolish. He had owned it for 3 days. Jonas had inherited its weight long before Warren ever saw the listing. "I'll pay for the work I hire," Warren said. Jonas looked at him then. "That's not the same thing." "No," Warren said. "It isn't." That was the first time Jonas seemed to truly look at him. Not kindly, but directly. The afternoon turned the house from gray to gold for nearly 20 minutes when the clouds thinned and winter sun struck the windows facing the lake. They were clearing the main room then, pulling old canvas coverings from furniture too damaged to save. Dust rose in slow clouds around them. Marlow moved through it all with quiet care. At first, Warren thought the dog was only keeping close because of the strangers, but Marlow kept stopping where there was no danger and no obvious scent worth tracking. Beside a chair, placed alone near a window, in front of a narrow door at the end of the hall, near a patch of wall in the parlor where the wallpaper had faded around a broad rectangle. Each time, Warren called him away. Each time, Marlow obeyed. And each time, Warren felt faintly corrected. At the lone chair, Warren finally stopped and looked. It faced the lake, not the room. The upholstery had gone pale with age. One arm was worn smooth where a hand must have rested thousands of times. On the small table beside it sat a porcelain cup, cracked at the handle, still holding the brown stain of tea long evaporated. Something about it unsettled him more than the broken plaster. The chair was not abandoned like furniture. It had been left mid-life. Mabel came up behind him.
"That was Mrs. Whitcomb's spot, according to my mother."
"Eleanor Whitcomb?" Mabel nodded.
"Last one who lived here."
Warren looked at the cup. "She just left it?"
"People leave all kinds of things when they don't expect an ending to arrive that day."
The sentence was simple. That made it worse. Warren thought of lockers cleaned out by other men, bunks stripped after accidents, boots still under racks because their owners had not known they were wearing their last pair that morning. He reached for the cup, then stopped. Marlow stood beside the chair, watching him. For once, Warren did not move the dog along. He crouched slowly and looked beneath the table. There was nothing there but dust, a dropped button, and a brittle scrap of paper. He picked up the paper carefully. It was not a letter, only part of an old printed program torn across the middle. The paper had yellowed to the color of weak tea. Winter Recital, Whitcomb House, December 18th, 1947. Below that, half a line remained. Selections for violin and... The rest was gone. Warren held it between 2 fingers. Mabel leaned over his shoulder, and for a moment her usual bluntness softened. "Well," she said quietly, "haven't seen one of those in years." "You knew they held concerts here?" "Everybody knew. Not everybody was invited." The edge in her voice was not loud, but it cut cleanly. Warren looked around the room again. The tall windows, the fireplace, the staircase, the empty frames, the wall with the faded rectangle where something important had once hung. For the first time, he could almost hear the room full. Music, polished shoes, glasses, low voices, servants moving quietly at the edges. The house had not always been silent. It had once chosen who was allowed to make sound inside it. That thought stayed with him longer than he expected. Later, while Jonas worked outside and Mabel checked the trim in the hallway, Warren found more traces. A stack of brittle invitation cards in a drawer that had swollen shut, a dance card with no names written on it, a black ribbon tucked between pages of a water-damaged guest book. In the dining room, pale marks on the wallpaper showed where portraits had once hung. Their frames were gone. The nails remained. "People stripped it?" Warren asked. "Some," Mabel said. "Some things were sold. Some things walked away. Some got hidden. Old houses don't empty themselves all at once." She said it casually, but Warren noticed Marlow raise his head from the doorway. Not alert, interested. Warren almost laughed at himself. Now he was reading meaning into the dog's posture. But when Marlow walked down the hall and stopped outside the narrow door near the back staircase, Warren followed. The room beyond was small, colder than the rest, with one square window looking toward the greenhouse. A table sat beneath it. A rusted sewing machine occupied one corner under a sheet. Threads still hung from a wooden rack on the wall, their colors dulled by dust. Navy, cream, green, burgundy. "A sewing room," Warren said. Mabel appeared behind him. "My mother spent time in here." Warren turned. "She worked here?" "Before I was born. Cleaning, mending, kitchen help when they had events." Mabel crossed the threshold but did not go far. "She used to say this was the only room in the house where people told the truth. Not because they were honest, because they forgot servants could hear." Warren looked at the sewing machine. What did she hear? Mabel's mouth pressed into a line. Enough to dislike beautiful music when rich people were listening to it. That ended the conversation for a while. They worked until the light began to fail. Jonas came down from the roof stiff and cold, snow caught in his beard. He gave Warren a list written on the back of a receipt. Temporary patching, emergency flashing, tarps, boards, and a warning about the east slope that needed professional work before the next major storm. Warren read the list twice. He knew enough about materials to understand what it meant. Money. More than he had hoped. More than he could comfortably spend without making other choices. Marlow's veterinary appointment sat in his mind like a second invoice. The dog had not complained, but the limp in cold weather was becoming harder to pretend away. Warren could patch a roof poorly and pay later. He could not patch Marlow. Mabel watched his face. "You knew it would be bad." "I did." "No," she said. "You knew it would be old house bad. This is Whitcomb bad." Jonas pulled off his gloves. "County should have let it go." "Historic protection says otherwise," Warren said. "Historic protection doesn't climb up there in February." Warren folded the receipt and put it in his pocket. For a moment, irritation rose in him. Not at Jonas, not exactly. At the roof, the clause, the clerk's warnings, the town's knowing looks, his own stubbornness. At the fact that he had spent a life being useful in emergencies and now could be defeated by rot, ice, and money. Marlow came to his side and leaned lightly against his leg. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Enough for Warren. He rested his hand on the dog's head. Mabel saw it, though. Her expression changed in a way he could not name. "You bought this place for him, too," she said. Warren did not answer. He did not need to. Mabel nodded once, as if something about him had finally fit into place. "Then don't let the house take more than you meant to give." Jonas looked from Warren to Marlow, then away. The hard set of his mouth eased by the smallest degree. He picked up his toolbox. "I'll come back tomorrow if the road holds." "That your way of saying you took the job?" Mabel asked.
It's my way of saying the roof's not going to insult itself. He headed toward the door. Before leaving, he paused near Marlow. The dog watched him, calm and unreadable. Jonas did not reach down. Instead,
He shifted his boot away from a draft coming under the door and kicked an old rug against the gap. "There," he muttered. "Less cold on the floor." Then he left before anyone could comment. Mabel looked amused. Warren looked down at Marlow. "He like that?" Marlow lowered himself onto the rug Jonas had moved, as if accepting the offering. Mabel laughed under her breath. "Dog's got better manners than half this town." By dusk, Mabel was packing her tools. Before she left, Warren asked the question that had been sitting with him since the sewing room. What was Eleanor Whitcomb like? Mabel stopped winding an extension cord. To most people? Cold, proud, kept the curtains drawn, paid late if she paid at all toward the end. She glanced toward the staircase.
But my mother never thought it was that simple. What did she think?
Mabel took a long time answering. Snow tapped softly against the windows. The house seemed to listen with them. She used to say Mrs. Whitcomb wasn't cold. She was full. Full of things she didn't know where to put. Mabel zipped her tool bag. Grief, probably. Shame, maybe. Love, too late to do anybody good. Hard to say. Warren looked toward the parlor where the torn recital program now lay on the mantel. She lived here alone? After Thomas died, yes, more or less. People came and went less and less. Then one winter she stopped coming into town. After that, the house just... Mabel made a small motion with her hand. Folded in on itself. Warren understood that more than he wanted to. Mabel put on her hat. Don't make her into a ghost, Mr. Hale. Town already did that because it was easier than asking what happened. I'm not much for ghosts, Warren said. No, Mabel replied, opening the door to the cold. But you may be the type to listen to the dead without calling it that. She left him with that. Night came early over Alder Creek. Warren made another small fire and warmed soup on the camp stove. The house was colder with the workers gone, but less empty somehow. Not friendlier, just more complicated. He sat in the main room with the torn recital program on his knee. Marlow lay nearby on the rug Jonas had pushed against the draft. His eyes were closed now, but one ear remained angled toward Warren. The bills were real. The roof was real. The preservation clause was real. Marlow's shoulder was real. And yet, so was the chair by the window, the sewing room, the winter recital, Mabel's mother listening from the edges, Jonas's grandfather waiting for money that never came, Eleanor Whitcomb, remembered as cold because nobody knew what else to call a woman who had run out of ways to speak. Warren had thought he was buying work. Boards, pipes, stone, shingles. But Whitcomb House was not only broken in the places a man could touch with tools, it was broken in the stories people had told about it, and in the stories they had refused to tell. He looked at Marlow. The dog opened his eyes as if he had felt the attention. What did we get into? Warren asked softly. Marlow gave no answer. Outside, snow kept falling over the porch, the roof, the greenhouse, the road down to town. Inside, the old house settled and creaked, not like a warning this time, but like a body shifting in sleep. Warren folded the torn program carefully and placed it on the mantel. He had not found a secret. Not really. He had found proof that the house had once been full of music, and that some people had been allowed to hear it only from the hallway. That was enough for one day. The rest could wait until morning. The snow came hard during the night, and left the world softened by morning. It lay thick over the roof of Whitcomb House, rounded the porch rails, filled the old wagon tracks in the drive, and pressed against the lower panes of the greenhouse like white hands cupped to glass. The sky had cleared after the storm. Sunlight spilled over Alder Creek in a pale, cold wash, bright enough to make Warren squint when he stepped outside. Marlow went first, as he often did. The German shepherd moved carefully down the porch steps, his injured shoulder stiff for the first few strides. Warren watched without saying anything. He had learned that dignity mattered to old working dogs as much as it did to old sailors. After a minute, Marlow's gait steadied. His black saddle of fur shone where the winter sun touched it, and his breath drifted in silver puffs. "You'll tell me when it's too much," Warren said. Marlow kept walking. "That's what I thought." Behind them, the front door opened again, and Jonas Bell came out carrying a coil of rope and a pry bar. He had arrived before 8, grim as ever, with snow caught in his beard and a thermos tucked under one arm. He had spent the first hour checking the east roof line, then announced that nothing more useful could be done up there until the ice loosened, which was how they ended up behind the house, facing the greenhouse. It looked worse in the daylight. The structure had once been elegant, Warren could tell that much. Iron ribs arched upward in a long curve, and some of the old glass panes still held together, clouded with age and frost. But whole sections had cracked or fallen inward. Vines, long dead, clung to the frame like brown veins. The door hung crooked, half buried in drifted snow. Inside, broken pots, collapsed shelves, and rusted plant stands lay under a dusting of white that had blown through the gaps. Jonas rested the pry bar against his shoulder. "If you were hoping for oranges, you're about 60 years late." Warren looked at the bowed frame. Was it used for that? Oranges, winter roses, fancy herbs, things people grow when they've got money and time to prove winter doesn't apply to them. There was no bitterness in Jonas's voice this time. Not sharp bitterness, anyway. More like an old taste he was used to. Mabel had told them to inspect the greenhouse foundation before any repair work began. If the base had shifted too badly, restoring the structure would be more trouble than it was worth. Warren had repeated the phrase, "more trouble than it was worth," under his breath afterward, aware that it could apply to the entire property. He pushed open the crooked door. The greenhouse answered with a long, metallic groan. Marlow stopped just outside. Warren looked down. "Easy." The dog stepped in after him, but slowly. Cold lived differently inside the greenhouse. It did not bite like the open air. It sat still. The sun warmed the upper glass, but down near the floor, the air remained damp, mineral, and old. Snowmelt dripped from a cracked pane into a broken clay pot. Somewhere under the frost, moss had darkened the stone floor. Jonas moved ahead, testing the iron ribs with gloved hands. "Frame's bad, but not all gone. Foundation's what matters." Warren walked the perimeter. He was still thinking in practical layers: support, drainage, access, cost. Every space in the house now came with numbers attached: boards, labor, heat, time. He did not like that his mind did it automatically, but it did. A man could admire old craft for only so long before the bill arrived. Marlow was not interested in the frame. He had lowered his head near the far corner of the greenhouse, where a low brick structure ran along the wall. At first, Warren thought it was a planter, but then he noticed the iron vent plates and the old pipes disappearing beneath the stone. "Some kind of heating bed," Warren said. Jonas glanced over. "Old hot water system, maybe. Kept the plants alive when the rich folks wanted lemons in February." Marlow sniffed along the base of it, not urgently, not like a dog catching the scent of an animal. His movement was slower than that, more deliberate. He moved from one stone to another, paused, returned, then lowered his nose to a particular flagstone half hidden beneath moss. Warren felt his attention change. He had seen Marlow track fuel through rainwater. He had seen him pick one crate from a line of identical crates because something sealed inside it did not belong. He had seen him stop at a wall everyone else had walked past. The dog did not scratch. He did not bark. He placed one front paw on the stone and looked at Warren.
Jonas noticed the silence before the gesture. "What's he doing?" "Working," Warren said. "I thought he was retired." "So did I." Warren crouched beside Marlow. The smell reached him then, though faintly. Wet stone, old soil, rust, mold.
Nothing strange at first, but beneath it, there was something sharper, cleaner, almost sweet. He removed one glove and touched the edge of the flagstone. Cold, slick, slightly raised on one side. Jonas crouched across from him. "Could be a dead animal underneath." "Marlow doesn't mark dead things like that." "Meaning?" "Meaning he's interested, not warning." Jonas looked at the dog. Marlow held his gaze without friendliness or threat. From the doorway, Mabel's voice cut through the cold. "Don't pry anything without looking at the wall first." Warren turned. She had come in quietly, canvas coat dusted with snow, mustard hat pulled low over silver-brown hair. In one hand, she carried a lantern, though the sun made it unnecessary. In the other, her folded wooden ruler. "I thought you were checking the pantry floor," Jonas said. "I was. It lost." She stepped carefully over broken glass and came to the far corner. Her eyes moved over the brick heating bed, the floor stones, the wall behind them. Mabel did not hurry when she studied a structure. She looked like someone listening for a sentence the house had almost finished. "This section's older than the rest," she said. Warren followed her gaze. "Older how?" "See the stonework? Different mortar, thicker wall. My mother said there was a cold room under the greenhouse. Seed storage, bulbs, maybe preserves when the pantry filled up. Kept things stable through winter." Jonas frowned. "I've been in this greenhouse twice, never saw a hatch." "That's because people who built old houses enjoyed making simple things inconvenient." Mabel knelt, joints cracking softly, and brushed moss from the edge of the flagstone with her glove. A narrow iron ring appeared, dark with age and almost flush with the stone. No one spoke for a moment. It was not dramatic. That made it feel more real. Warren touched the ring. It resisted at first, then shifted with a gritty scrape. Jonas let out a low breath. "Well, I hate that." Mabel gave him the lantern. "Hold this." "You said not to pry." "I said not without looking first." "We looked." They worked slowly. Jonas cleared moss and old soil from the surrounding stones. Warren used the pry bar carefully, easing pressure along the seam. Mabel watched the wall for movement. Marlow stood back, alert but calm, his amber eyes fixed on the stone as if patience were part of the work. The flagstone lifted with a wet sigh. Beneath it was not earth. A narrow set of stone steps led down into darkness. Cold air rose from below. It smelled drier than the greenhouse, strangely enough. Old cedar, dust, and something faintly resinous. Mabel's expression changed. "Seed room," she said. But her voice had lost some certainty. Warren took the lantern from Jonas. "I'll go first." Jonas gave a humorless laugh. "That a military thing?" "No, it's a my house thing." Marlow moved before Warren could step down, placing himself between Warren and the opening. Warren touched the dog's shoulder. "Not this time. Stairs are narrow." Marlow did not like that. His left ear tilted outward, but he backed up when Warren gave the quiet hand signal. The steps were shallow and slick at the edges, but intact. Warren descended slowly, lantern raised. The room below was no larger than a walk-in pantry, built of stone with a low arched ceiling. Wooden shelves lined two walls, most of them warped or collapsed. A few cracked jars remained, their contents reduced to dark stains. Bundles of old plant labels lay in a corner, tied with string that had gone brittle. But the air was not foul. It was cold, dry, preserved. Warren turned once, taking it in. Jonas came down behind him, muttering something about tetanus. Mabel stayed at the top for a moment, then descended with the caution of someone whose knees had earned the right to complain. Marlow waited above until Warren looked up and nodded. Then the dog came down carefully, one step at a time. At the bottom, he did not search the shelves. He went straight to the brick base beneath the old heating bed. There, set into the stonework behind a loose cedar panel, was a recess no larger than a footlocker. Marlow lowered his nose. This time, his tail moved once. Warren felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. Not fear, not excitement. Recognition. Some things were hidden by panic, others by care. This looked like care. He eased the cedar panel away. It came loose in his hands, dry and light. Inside the recess lay a long object wrapped in dark oilcloth, tied with leather straps that had stiffened with age. A faint, waxy film coated the outer layer. Jonas leaned close. "That's not seeds." "No," Warren said. Mabel did not move. Her face had gone very still. Warren lifted the bundle with both hands. It was lighter than he expected, but not empty. The shape was unmistakably deliberate. Long, curved in the middle, protected with padding under the cloth. Dust clung to the waxed surface. The leather tie cracked when Warren touched it. "Upstairs," Mabel said. Warren looked at her. Her voice was quiet but firm. "Not down here. If that's what I think it might be, we open it where there's light, and no one drops anything." No one argued. They carried it into the main room of the house and set it on the cleared dining table, the one Warren had nearly dragged outside the day before Mabel snapped at him that old maple deserved better than snow. The room seemed to gather around the object. Jonas stood back with his arms crossed. Mabel removed her gloves. Warren noticed that her hands, usually quick and certain, were slower now. Marlow sat beside Warren's leg, close enough that his shoulder touched Warren's knee. Mabel untied the leather strap with a small knife. The first layer of oilcloth loosened reluctantly. Beneath it was another wrap, thinner, with a coating that smelled faintly of beeswax. Then a layer of faded cloth, once blue or green, now somewhere between gray and memory. Finally, a wooden case appeared. It was long and narrow, dark with age, its brass fittings dulled, almost brown. The handle had cracked but held. On one corner, someone had pressed a small paper label under wax. The writing had blurred too much to read. Warren heard Jonas swallow. Mabel opened the latches. Inside lay a violin. For a moment, no one said anything. The instrument rested in a shaped velvet bed, the fabric faded but still protective. Its wood was dark amber, deeper at the edges, with a glow that seemed impossible after so many winters underground. The varnish had dulled in places. One seam near the lower bout looked slightly open. The strings had slackened, and the bridge leaned at an angle. But it was whole. Not perfect, alive enough to have survived. Warren stared at it with the discomfort of a man who had expected damage and found tenderness. He could smell it now, clearly. Rosin, old wood, oilcloth, metal, cedar, and the dry sweetness of preservation. Marlow had found a scent history had almost managed to keep. Jonas took a step closer. "Is it valuable?" Mabel closed the case halfway, not enough to hide it, only enough to protect it from breath and dust. "Don't ask that first," she said. Jonas looked at her. "What should I ask?" "Who put it there?" The question changed the room. Warren looked at the case again. Suddenly the violin was not an object discovered beneath a greenhouse. It was a decision someone had made. Hands had wrapped it. Someone had chosen wax, cloth, cedar, stone. Someone had known it needed to be protected from damp, from cold, from people. Warren reached toward it, then stopped before touching the wood. Mabel saw the restraint and nodded once. "I know someone," she said. "Burlington. Restores old instruments."
Dr. Lydia Harrow.
Jonas raised an eyebrow. "You just know a violin doctor?" "I know people who know what they're doing. It's a habit you might try." She stepped away and took out her phone. The call lasted less than 5 minutes. Mabel's voice changed when she spoke to Lydia, still blunt but careful, respectful in a way Warren had not heard from her before. She described the house, the case, the storage conditions, the instrument's visible state. Then she listened for a long time. "She's coming," Mabel said when she hung up. "Today?" Warren asked. "If the roads hold. She told us not to tune it, not to clean it, not to lift it by the neck, not to breathe on it more than necessary, and not to let anybody with enthusiasm near it." Jonas looked at Warren. "That last one might be me." "No," Mabel said. "That last one is everybody." They waited. Waiting changed the mood more than discovery had. Work slowed. Jonas went back to checking the greenhouse entrance, but returned every few minutes as if the case might vanish. Mabel wrote down where they had found it, how it had been wrapped, the state of the room below, and the position of the recess. Warren photographed everything with his phone because procedure, once begun, steadied him. Marlow stayed near the table, not guarding exactly, keeping company. In the afternoon, just as the light began to soften toward blue, a dark Subaru climbed the snowy drive. The woman who stepped out carried a slim leather tool case and moved with the measured caution of someone who did not trust winter steps or human excitement. Dr. Lydia Harrow was not what Warren had expected. He had imagined someone older, perhaps severe. Lydia was in her late 40s, slender, with chestnut hair pinned back with a plain metal clip and a gray-blue wool coat buttoned to the throat. Her eyes were quiet but exacting. She greeted Mabel first, then Warren, then glanced at Marlow with a small nod, as if acknowledging another professional in the room. "I'm told he found it," she said. "Marlow did," Warren replied. "Then Marlow may have a better nose than half the auction world." She said it dryly, but without mockery. Inside, Lydia removed her coat, washed her hands from a bottle of water Mabel provided, dried them carefully, and put on thin gloves. The room settled into silence as she opened the case. Her face did not change dramatically. That impressed Warren. She did not gasp. She did not proclaim fortune. She did not turn the violin over like a prize. She leaned close, using a small light and magnifier, and studied the seams, corners, varnish, purfling, bridge, scroll, and interior label. Minutes passed. Jonas shifted once and stopped when Mabel glared at him. Finally, Lydia sat back. "I can tell you what I will not say," she said. Warren folded his arms. "All right. I will not say this is worth millions. Not today. Not from a table in a half-heated house after a snowstorm." Jonas looked faintly disappointed. Warren did not. Lydia continued. "I will say it is old. I will say it has been stored with more care than I expected. I will say the wood, varnish, and construction deserve serious examination. And I will say that if the label and provenance lead where they might lead, then yes, it could be extremely valuable." "How valuable?" Jonas asked before he could stop himself. Lydia looked at him. "Valuable enough that the wrong first decision could ruin more than the instrument." That silenced him. She turned back to the case. "There's something else." With careful fingers, Lydia lifted the edge of the faded cloth lining the case pocket. From beneath it, she drew a black and white photograph, curled slightly at the corners. Warren took it only after Lydia nodded. The photograph showed the main room of Whitcomb House, decades younger. The fireplace was clean, the windows bright, the walls filled with framed pictures. A young woman stood near the hearth holding a violin. She was slender, dark-haired, composed without looking cold. Beside her stood a man in a naval uniform from another era, one hand resting on the back of a chair, his eyes turned not toward the camera, but toward her. Warren felt the room around him shift, not in a supernatural way, in the way a place changes when you see it remembered by someone else. He turned the photograph over. On the back, in ink faded brown, someone had written, "For the song I could not send." No one spoke. Even Jonas seemed to understand that this was not the moment to ask about money. Warren looked at the violin case, then the photograph, then the room itself. The faded rectangle on the wall, the torn winter recital program on the mantel, the chair by the window. The house had been giving them pieces, not clues exactly, but fragments of a life it had failed to finish telling. Lydia took the photograph back gently and placed it beside the case. "This needs documentation," she said, "and legal care. Do not sell it. Do not move it again unless necessary. Do not let the town turn it into a story before you know whose story it is." Warren heard the warning under her words. Too late, perhaps, for the town not to talk, but not too late to choose how he answered. Marlow leaned his head against Warren's thigh. The gesture was small, almost tired. Warren looked down and saw the dog's eyes half closed, his body warm against Warren's leg. Only then did Warren realize what he felt. Not joy, not triumph, unease. He had found something that could solve problems. The roof, the heating, Marlow's shoulder, the thin line between getting through winter and failing before February. A man would have to be dishonest not to feel the pull of that. But the violin did not feel like a windfall. It felt like a voice placed carefully into silence, waiting for someone to decide whether to listen or to cash it in. Warren rested his hand on Marlow's head. "All right," he said quietly. Lydia looked at him. "All right what?" "We do this properly." Mabel's expression softened, though only for a second. Jonas looked away toward the window, as if the snow outside had become suddenly interesting. Lydia closed the case with the care of someone lowering a lid over a sleeping thing. Outside, evening gathered over the hill, and the greenhouse darkened behind the house, its broken panes catching the last of the winter light. Whitcomb House had offered up its first true secret. But Warren understood, with a heaviness that felt almost like respect, that finding it had been the easy part. By the next morning, the violin had changed the temperature of the house. Not the actual cold. That remained stubbornly in the walls, in the stone floors, in the air that slipped beneath doors and around window frames, no matter how much fire Warren coaxed from the hearth. But something else had shifted. Every room seemed to know there was a wooden case on the dining table, closed, wrapped again in cloth, no longer hidden, and no longer safe in the simple way forgotten things were safe. Warren woke before dawn and found himself standing beside it. Marlow lay near the fire, chin on his paws, watching without lifting his head. "I know," Warren said quietly. "I'm not touching it." The dog's eyes stayed on him. Warren almost smiled. "You don't have to supervise every bad idea I haven't had yet." But the truth was, the idea had already come. It had arrived sometime during the night, practical and unwelcome. The roof, the furnace, the road. Marlow's shoulder. A number he did not know yet, but could imagine. If Dr. Lydia Harrow was right, if the violin was what it might be, it could pay for everything the house needed and more. A man could call that luck. A man could also call it a test. Warren stepped away from the table before temptation could make itself sound like common sense. By 9, Mabel had arrived, with a woman Warren had not met before. "She'll keep us from doing something stupid," Mabel said as they came through the front door. The woman beside her brushed snow from the shoulders of a camel-colored wool coat and looked around the entry hall with sharp, assessing eyes. She was in her early 50s, compact, with a neat black bob threaded with silver and a leather document bag held close against one side. Nothing about her seemed rushed. Nothing about her seemed easily impressed. "Nora Vance," she said, extending a gloved hand. "I handled portions of the county's abandoned property transfer on this house."
Not the romantic portions, if there were any. Warren shook her hand. "Warren Hale." "I know. Your signature appears in 6 places where most people stop reading by page 2. Mabel snorted. "Told you!" Nora removed her gloves and glanced toward Marlow, who had risen but remained near the hearth. "And that's the dog who found the instrument?" "Marlow." Nora nodded once to him, as if he were another witness in the room. "Then Marlow has complicated your life." "He has a history of that," Warren said. They moved to the dining table. Lydia arrived soon after, carrying her slim leather tool case and a covered archival box she had brought from Burlington. Snow clung to the hem of her gray-blue coat. She greeted everyone softly, but her attention went to the wrapped case before she finished unbuttoning. Nora watched the exchange with professional calm. "Before anyone opens anything," she said, "I want to be clear. Mr.
Hale, buying Whitcomb House does not automatically make every movable object inside it yours in any clean moral or legal sense." Warren folded his arms. "The contract included abandoned contents." "It did, in broad language. Enough for furniture, damaged household items, fixtures not separately listed, things of ordinary value. But a potentially historic instrument with possible identifying marks and evidence of prior ownership is not ordinary." Mabel leaned against the sideboard. "Meaning?" "Meaning we document first and decide later." Nora opened her bag and removed a folder already marked with neat tabs. "No sale, no cleaning, no transport unless necessary for conservation. Photographs of location, condition, packaging, markings, written timeline of discovery, names of everyone present. Then, provenance research." Jonas, who had come in halfway through with a coil of extension cord over one shoulder, paused by the doorway. "So he might not own it." Nora looked at him. He might not. Or he might become temporary custodian while rightful ownership is determined." "That sounds like owning trouble." "That," Nora said, "is often the most accurate definition of ownership." Warren looked at the wrapped case. He disliked how quickly the matter had moved from awe to paperwork. Yet part of him respected it. Paperwork was irritating because it slowed impulse. Sometimes that was the only thing standing between a man and a mistake he could not repair. "I want it done right," he said. Nora studied him, perhaps looking for disappointment. She found it. He knew she did. But she also found resolve. "Good," she said. "Then we begin." For the next hour, the house became less like a ruin and more like an evidence room. Nora wrote with a dark blue fountain pen in a precise hand. Lydia photographed the case, the wrapping, the brass latches, the softened wax, the instrument from angles Warren would not have thought mattered. Mabel drew a rough map of the greenhouse, the hidden room, and the recess where they had found it. Jonas provided a measurement of the stone opening with reluctant accuracy, muttering that if he had known finding old music came with paperwork, he would have stayed on the roof. Marlow stayed near Warren, shifting only when someone moved too close to the case too quickly. At one point, Nora looked over her glasses. "Does he always monitor people like that?" "He monitors intentions," Warren said. "That is not legally admissible, but useful." Lydia, examining the case more closely, went still. She lifted the violin only enough to inspect the inside with a small light. Her movements were careful, almost reverent. Then she angled the light toward the interior label, paused, and looked at Warren. "There's a name." Nora stopped writing. Mabel straightened. Warren felt the room narrow to Lydia's voice. "Not just a maker's label," Lydia said. "There's a separate inscription on the inner rib."
Very faint. It may have been added later. "What does it say?" Warren asked.
Lydia adjusted the light. "Celeste Armand." The name did not echo. It settled, quietly, permanently. Warren looked at the photograph lying in its protective sleeve. The young woman by the hearth, holding the violin as if it were part of her body, suddenly seemed less like a figure from a forgotten picture and more like someone who had just been called back into the room. "Who was she?" Jonas asked. Lydia did not answer immediately. She took out her phone, searched through a database she had access to, then frowned with concentration. "There was a Celeste Armand who performed in New York and Boston after the war," she said. "European-born, though records differ on where exactly. Chamber programs, benefit concerts, small venues. Her name appears for a few years, then almost disappears around 1948 or 1949. "Disappears how?" Mabel asked. "Professionally. No major listings after that. It happens." Marriage, illness, immigration issues, name change, poverty, choice. Lydia looked at the violin. Or something else. Nora closed her folder halfway. "Now we have a person. That means we slow down further." Warren kept his eyes on the photograph. Celeste Armand. A name was a small thing, until it belonged to someone who had been erased by absence. The discovery did not make the violin feel more valuable to him. It made it feel less ownable. Later, when Nora left to pull county records, and Lydia returned to Burlington with only photographs and notes, not the violin, Warren remained restless. The case stayed locked in the dining room, temporarily sealed in the archival box Lydia had brought. Nora had insisted on labels, signatures, and a note taped across the closure. Warren had signed his name beneath hers. It should have reassured him. It did not. In the afternoon, Marlow began returning to the East Tower. He did not make a performance of it. He simply rose from the rug whenever Warren passed near the stairs, climbed slowly to the second floor, and stood outside the narrow door at the end of the hall. The tower room was one of the few places Warren had not properly cleared. Its windows overlooked the frozen lake and the greenhouse roof. A curved wall, built into the tower's shape, held warped shelves and a cabinet with glass gone cloudy from age. The first time, Warren called Marlow away. The second time, he followed. "You've already earned your pension," he told the dog. Marlow ignored the remark. Inside the tower room, the air felt different from the rest of the house. Drier, higher, touched by more light. Snow reflected upward from the lake and filled the room with a pale glow. A cracked music stand stood near the window. On the wall, faded outlines showed where shelves or framed pages had once hung. In one corner sat a narrow wooden chair, not elegant but carefully made, its seat worn smooth. Mabel came up behind him, breathing a little heavier from the stairs. This was the listening room. Not the music room? For the family, maybe. For one person, maybe. She looked around. My mother said sounds carried strangely up here. You could hear the room below when they played, but softer. Like music underwater. Marlow had moved to the curved shelves. He lowered his nose near the bottom panel, then stepped back and looked at Warren. Jonas, who had been repairing a temporary brace downstairs, appeared in the doorway. "If this turns into more paperwork, I'm charging extra." Warren knelt by the shelves. One wood panel sat slightly proud of the others. Not enough to notice unless a man had been made to look by a dog who never rushed. Warren pressed gently. The panel shifted, then stuck. Mabel handed him a thin pry tool without a word. "No damage," she said. "Wasn't planning any." That's what men say before damage. He worked slowly.
Jonas held a lantern angled low, though the room still had daylight. The panel loosened with a dry click and came free in Warren's hands. Behind it was a narrow cavity. No gold, no weapon, no dramatic box. Only a bundle of letters tied with a tarnished silver ribbon. The paper had browned at the edges. The top envelope bore no stamp and no address, only a name written in a strong, slanted hand. Celeste. Mabel's face changed. Jonas stopped pretending not to care. Warren did not touch the bundle right away. He had opened containers in his life that changed what came after. This one was small, fragile, and somehow heavier than most. Mabel said, "We should call Nora." "We will," Warren said. "And Lydia." But he did not move. The name on the envelope held him there. Celeste. Not Miss Armand. Not a label. Not a subject of research. A first name written by someone who had expected the paper to carry what his voice had failed to say. They documented before reading. Nora returned, slightly annoyed at the weather and fully annoyed at the house. Lydia joined by video call first, then asked them to place the letters in a dry room, away from the fire. Only after photographs and notes did Nora allow Warren to open the first envelope. He did so at the tower table, with everyone quiet around him. The letter was from Thomas Whitcomb. Warren knew the name from county records and from Mabel's stories. The naval officer, Eleanor's husband, the man whose death had supposedly closed the house. He expected romance, perhaps apology, perhaps betrayal. What he found was quieter. Celeste, I have been unkind in the shape of kindness. That may be the worst sort. Warren stopped reading aloud. Mabel looked at him but did not push. He read silently at first, then continued because the others deserved the truth of the room they stood in. Thomas wrote of illness, not dramatically, not with self-pity. He described lungs that no longer recovered after cold mornings, a cough he hid during dinner, doctors who spoke in guarded tones. He wrote of the sea and how it had once made him feel endless, then made him feel mortal. He wrote that Celeste deserved a stage larger than Vermont, a life not bound to a house where people praised her music while watching her origins, her accent, her difference. I told myself I was freeing you, the letter said, but perhaps I only lacked the courage to ask you to stay and see me diminished. Warren's voice thinned near the end. He lowered the letter. No one spoke. Outside, the wind dragged powder snow against the tower windows. Jonas looked down at his boots. Mabel's eyes shone, but she blinked it away with irritation, as if emotion were an inconvenience she refused to indulge in public. Nora took the letter carefully and slid it into an archival sleeve. There may be more, she said softly. There were. Some were unfinished, some dated, some not. Thomas wrote as a man trying to step away without admitting he wanted to be stopped. He never mentioned hatred. He never accused Celeste. He circled the same wound from different angles, his illness, his family's expectations, the quiet cruelty of rooms where she was admired but not fully welcomed. The letters had never been sent. That was the part Warren could not stop looking at. Not the sadness, the failure of delivery. A life could change because someone folded the truth and put it in a wall. Marlow moved closer and pressed his shoulder lightly against Warren's leg. For a moment, Warren was no longer in the tower room. He was in a kitchen, years earlier, standing with a suitcase by the door while his wife sat at the table with her hands folded around a cup gone cold. He remembered the exact light of that morning. He remembered saying,
"It's better if I go now," as if leaving before the argument made him kinder. She had not shouted. That had been worse. She had only nodded. Years later, he understood that silence could be a door closing so softly a man convinced himself it remained open. Marlow leaned harder. Warren inhaled. "I'm here," he murmured, too low for anyone but the dog. Mabel pretended not to hear. The tower letters were not the only ones. Marlow led them again, though by then even Jonas had stopped making jokes about it. This time the dog went to the sewing room, where afternoon light lay thin across the old machine and the racks of faded thread. He stopped at a drawer in the sewing table that Warren had assumed was swollen shut. Mabel stood very still. "My mother worked in this room," she said. Warren did not ask if she wanted to leave. He knew she would not. The drawer resisted, then opened with a brittle scrape. Inside, beneath folded scraps of cloth, were 3 envelopes wrapped in a dark blue ribbon. The handwriting was different, finer, more upright. The top letter was addressed simply, Thomas. Celeste's letters were not the words of a helpless woman trapped by wealth or heartbreak. They were clear, proud, and wounded. She wrote that she had grown tired of being treated as music first and person second. She wrote that the house applauded her when she played, but quieted when she spoke of where she came from. She wrote that Thomas's distance had wounded her less than his assumption that she needed him to decide what freedom meant. "You call it kindness to open the door," she wrote, "but you never asked whether I wished to leave through it." Warren read that sentence twice, not aloud the second time. Mabel folded her arms tightly, looking toward the sewing machine. "Good for her," she said. Jonas glanced at her, surprised. "What?" Mabel said. "A woman can be heartbroken and still be right." The last letter was unfinished. Celeste had written only half a page. She spoke of leaving before winter closed the roads. She wrote that she would not take the violin because in that house the instrument had become tangled with too many expectations. She did not say she no longer loved it. She said she could not carry it and remain herself. No one knew what to do with that. Nora finally said, "These are not proof of ownership by themselves, but they are proof of relationship, proof of context." Lydia, who had driven back after the tower discovery and now stood near the doorway with snow melting on her coat, answered quietly, "Sometimes context is the only thing that keeps value from becoming theft." Warren looked at the sewing room around them. Thread, cloth, labor. A place where servants heard truths because the important people forgot they were present. Thomas's letters hidden high in the listening room. Celeste's letters hidden here. 2 people speaking honestly only after they had stopped speaking to each other. As evening came, they gathered the letters into protective sleeves and placed them with Nora's notes. No one suggested reading more that night. The house felt too full. Warren remained in the tower after the others had gone downstairs. Marlow sat beside him, looking out toward the frozen lake. Snow had begun again, light at first, then thicker. Warren held one of the empty envelopes in his gloved hand. He thought of all the things that went unsent. Letters, apologies, explanations, requests to stay. He had spent much of his life believing silence was discipline, that leaving without asking for comfort was strength, that making decisions alone spared other people the burden of him. Thomas had believed something like that. Celeste had seen through it. Warren looked down at Marlow. The dog's muzzle had gone grayer in the winter light. His injured shoulder rested close to Warren's boot, warm and solid. "You never needed me to explain much," Warren said. Marlow turned his head slightly. "That may be why I trusted you." The dog leaned against him. Below them, Whitcomb House creaked in the cold.
But Warren no longer heard only age in it. He heard withheld words, rooms that had kept what people could not carry, walls that had hidden not treasure, but hesitation. He had come looking for work he could do with his hands. Now the house was asking for something harder, not discovery, not repair. Patience. The courage to hear people all the way to the end, even when the ending did not flatter them. Warren placed the envelope carefully on the table. Outside the tower windows, snow erased the lake piece by piece. Inside, beside the old music stand and the dog who had stayed with him through every silence he had mistaken for strength, Warren understood that Whitcomb House did not need him to solve a mystery. It needed him not to turn away before the story finished speaking.
The rumor reached town before Warren did. By noon, Alder Creek had changed its posture toward Whitcomb House. It was not obvious from a distance. The same snow sat on the diner awning, the same trucks idled outside the hardware store, the same smoke lifted from chimneys into a sky the color of dull tin. But when Warren walked into the diner with Marlow at his side, conversation did not simply lower, it rearranged itself. A woman at the counter stopped stirring her coffee. Two men in work jackets looked away too late. Someone near the back booth whispered the word, violin. And though the sound was small, it traveled cleanly through the room. Marlow heard it too. His ears moved once, but he stayed close to Warren's leg. Warren did not sit. Jonas Bell was at the counter, one hand around a mug, his black knit cap beside him. He looked as if he had not slept well. When Warren stepped toward him, Jonas did not pretend surprise. "You told someone," Warren said. The diner went quiet enough for the kitchen fan to sound loud. Jonas looked down into his coffee. "I mentioned Lydia was up there." "That's not the same as mentioning a violin." "No," Jonas said. "It isn't." Warren felt anger rise, steady and hot. It was not the kind that made him shout. That had never been his way. His anger went cold before it left his mouth. "You knew Nora told us to keep it contained." Jonas turned on the stool. His face was rough from the cold, beard darker where snow had melted into it. "And you knew this house had a history before you signed for it." Mabel Price, behind the counter today because the diner owner had asked for help during a busy morning, set down a coffee pot with more force than necessary. "Jonas?" He did not look at her. "No," he said. "If we're going to talk about what people know, let's talk about it." Warren's jaw tightened. "Go ahead." Jonas stood. He was not as tall as Warren, but there was no shrinking in him. "My grandfather fixed that west porch, rebuilt service stairs, patched leaks in rooms where people drank wine under chandeliers, and told him the check would come next month. It didn't. My father spent years hearing that Whitcomb House was important enough to protect, but not important enough to pay the men who kept it standing." A few people in the diner lowered their eyes. Jonas pointed toward the hill, though the house could not be seen through the windows. "Now something worth real money turns up in there, and suddenly it's all legal papers and private experts and everybody asking the town to keep quiet. Why? Because the new owner says so?" Warren took a slow breath. Marlow shifted beside him, not warning, not interfering, only present. "I didn't hide it from the town to steal it," Warren said. "I'm not saying you did. You came close." Jonas looked away first, but not with shame exactly. More like the truth had struck both of them, and neither liked the sound. "I said more than I should have," he admitted. "I won't dress that up. But don't ask people here to care about that house like it's some wounded old lady if you're not ready to care about what it did to them too." That landed harder than Warren expected, not because Jonas was entirely right, because he was not entirely wrong. Warren had spent days learning to see Whitcomb House as more than boards and bills, more than a preservation problem, more than a shelter for himself and Marlow.
But maybe he had still been looking from the inside outward. Maybe the town had been standing outside that house for generations, watching music glow behind windows while their own stories froze on the porch. Mabel's voice softened, though it stayed firm. "Jonas, you still had no right to let it spread." "I know." The admission was quiet. Warren studied him. There were men who lied best when cornered. Jonas was not lying.
He was angry, embarrassed, and too proud to ask forgiveness in front of a room that had known his family for decades. Warren turned toward the door. "Be at the house tomorrow if you still want the job." Jonas looked up, startled. "That's it?" "No," Warren said. "That's today. Tomorrow depends on whether you show up." He walked out before the diner could decide what kind of scene it had witnessed. Outside, the cold hit clean and bright. Marlow followed him to the truck, then paused before climbing in. He looked back at the diner. Warren opened the passenger door. "Don't start taking his side." Marlow looked at him with calm, amber eyes. Warren sighed. "Fine. Maybe a little." By late afternoon, the rumor had grown legs. Nora called first, voice tight with controlled irritation. Then Lydia. Then Mabel. The story had already shifted from old instrument found at Whitcomb House to $1 million violin under a mansion to war treasure in the greenhouse, depending on who had spoken last and how much coffee they had been drinking. Warren stood in the dining room, looking at the sealed archival box on the table, while Nora's voice came through the phone. "Do not talk to collectors. Do not respond to reporters. Do not let anyone photograph the instrument. If anyone asks, the matter is under documentation and provenance review." Reporters? It only takes one person with a cousin who runs a local history page. Warren rubbed his forehead. "I miss when the worst problem was the roof." "The roof was simpler," Nora said. "Not cheaper." After the call, Warren checked the seals again. Not because he suspected anyone had touched them, because doing something with his hands helped. Marlow sat near the dining room threshold, watching the front door. Just before dusk, headlights climbed the hill. They moved slowly, smoothly, unlike Jonas's truck or Mabel's van. Warren stepped onto the porch as a dark sedan came to a stop in the drive. Clean car. Boston plates. Tires made for winter, but polished enough to look recent. The man who stepped out wore a charcoal wool coat cut too well for Alder Creek weather, black leather gloves, and a silver-gray scarf tucked neatly at the collar. He was in his mid-50s, tall and narrow, with steel-colored hair combed back and a face built for polite negotiations. He carried a slim, black leather case. He looked at Whitcomb House without surprise. Then he looked at Warren. "Mr. Hale?" Warren did not step down from the porch. "Depends who's asking." "Calvin Rourke." The man removed one glove slowly, finger by finger, and offered a card. "Rourke and Bellamy Auctions, Boston. Fine instruments, estates, private collections." Warren did not take the card immediately. Marlow came to the doorway behind him and stood partly in shadow. Calvin noticed the dog, measured him, and wisely made no move closer. "I'm not selling anything," Warren said. "Of course," Calvin replied. His voice was smooth, not oily. That made Warren trust it less. "You do not yet know what you have." "I know enough not to invite strangers into my house." A sensible position. Calvin lowered his hand but kept the card visible. "I am not here to pressure you. I am here because if the reports are even partly accurate, you are standing at the beginning of a complicated process. Many people will offer help. Most will mean profit. Some will mean harm by accident. And you?" Calvin smiled faintly. "I mean profit honestly." That, Warren had to admit,
was not the worst answer. Mabel arrived 10 minutes later because Warren called her and said only, "Boston is on my porch." Nora joined by phone. Lydia, when told the name Calvin Rourke, went silent for 3 seconds. "I know of him," she said. "He is not a thief. That does not mean he is harmless." Calvin accepted the half-heated parlor without complaint. He did not remove his coat, as if he understood he was not being welcomed so much as contained. He set his leather case on his knees, unopened. "I will speak plainly," he said. "If the instrument is connected to Celeste Armand, and if the construction supports the period I have heard suggested, its value could be significant, possibly life-changing." Nora's voice came sharp from Warren's phone on the mantel. "No valuation without authentication." Calvin inclined his head toward the phone. "Agreed. I am not valuing. I am outlining possibilities." Lydia, also on the call now, said, "Possibilities are often where damage begins." "They are also where funding begins, Dr. Harrow." The room tightened. Warren stood near the fireplace, arms folded. Mabel leaned against the wall by the parlor door. Marlow lay between Warren and Calvin, not threatening, simply placed. Calvin looked around the room, the cracked plaster, the temporary bracing, the tarps over the windows, the buckets beneath 2 leaks. His eyes missed nothing. "This house requires serious money," he said. "Your roof alone may exceed your first estimates. Climate control for an instrument like this, if it remains here, will require far more. Insurance, legal review, conservation, security. You also have personal expenses." Warren's face did not change. Calvin's gaze moved briefly to Marlow's left shoulder, the way the dog held it after standing. Too perceptive, too polite to mention directly. That made it worse. "A properly handled sale," Calvin continued, "could restore this property, fund any legal obligations, compensate parties with legitimate claims, and leave you with enough to live comfortably. The instrument could go to a collector capable of preserving it at museum standard." Mabel spoke for the first time. "Behind a locked door, where nobody from here ever hears it." "Possibly," Calvin said. "Or on loan, or in a private foundation. There are many arrangements." Warren looked toward the dining room. The violin was not visible from where he stood, but he felt its presence like a second fire in the house. Nora said, "Mr. Hale will not sign anything." "I have brought nothing for him to sign." Calvin opened his leather case at last and removed a single folder. "Only examples, prior sales, conservation structures, insurance models. I believe informed decisions are better than romantic ones." Lydia's voice cooled. "And commercial ones?" "Commercial decisions at least admit what they are." Warren almost disliked him less for that. Almost. After Calvin left, his card remained on the mantel. White stock, minimal black lettering, embossed so lightly the name could be felt more than seen. Mabel stared at it as if it were a dead insect. "He's good," she said. Warren nodded. "Yes." "That worries me more than if you were bad." Outside, Calvin's sedan rolled down the hill and disappeared through the trees. Inside, Warren did not move for a long while. Marlow rose slowly and came to him. The dog leaned against Warren's leg. That was when Warren allowed himself to think the forbidden thought fully. If he sold the violin, Marlow could see the best veterinary specialist in New England. Surgery, if needed, therapy, pain treatment that did not require Warren to count pills and dollars in the same breath. The east roof could be repaired before it failed, the furnace replaced, the road plowed all winter. No more camp stove. No more sleeping in one heated room of a house too large for hope. He could do good with the money. That was the dangerous part. Greed was easy to distrust when it looked ugly. It was harder when it arrived dressed as responsibility. The next morning, Lydia returned in person with a folder of her own. She looked tired, but unusually alert, her chestnut hair pinned carelessly, her scarf wound crooked from the drive. She placed the folder on the dining table beside Nora's documentation and did not sit. "I found her," she said. Warren looked up from the roof estimate spread before him. "Celeste?" "Yes, and no." Lydia opened the folder. After 1949, the name Celeste Armand disappears from performance listings, but a woman named Celia Arden begins appearing in small community notices in Maine, New Hampshire, Western Massachusetts. Not concert halls, churches, veterans' hospitals, adult education programs. Mabel stepped closer. Lydia laid out copies of clippings, faded newspaper columns, program notes, a photograph too grainy to identify at first glance. The names were small, the events smaller. Music for returning sailors, evening classes for adult beginners, string workshop at St. Agnes Veterans Home. Celia Arden to lead winter listening circle. Warren picked up one clipping. The photograph showed an older woman seated with a violin across her lap, surrounded not by children, not by prodigies, but by grown men and women in folding chairs. Some held instruments badly, some held nothing at all. One man in the corner had his hands pressed over his ears, yet he had not left the room. Lydia's voice softened. She taught people who were never going to perform. Older students, widows, dock workers, veterans with tremors, men who couldn't sit through fireworks, women who hadn't touched music since before the war. Warren read the caption twice. Miss Arden says music need not be mastered to be useful. The room went quiet around that sentence. Marlow, lying near the hearth, lifted his head. Warren felt something move in him, not sharply, but deep enough to hurt. He had spent years flinching inwardly at sounds nobody else noticed. A slammed metal door, a radio crackle, the hollow boom of ice shifting on a lake, too much like steel under stress. He had never called it fear. He had called it training, attention, habit, anything but the wound it was. And here was Celeste, Celia, whoever she had chosen to become, sitting in rooms with people who could not bear the world at full volume, offering them not cure, not glory, but a reason to remain seated through one more song. Lydia placed another page down. This is from a small memorial notice. She died in the late 70s. No surviving spouse listed, no children, few possessions. But several former students contributed to a music fund in her name for adults recovering from trauma. Mabel touched the edge of the paper, then withdrew her hand. Jonas had come in quietly during Lydia's explanation. Warren had not heard him. He stood near the doorway, cap in hand, face unreadable. So she didn't go back to being famous, Jonas said. No, Lydia answered. It appears she chose something else. Or had nothing else. Possibly. Lydia looked at him. But the records don't read like failure. Jonas stared at the clipping, his voice lowered. My father used to say the worst part of being poor wasn't not getting invited in. It was when people acted like the room was empty because you weren't there. No one responded quickly. Warren looked at him. Jonas did not apologize for yesterday, not directly. Instead, he stepped fully into the room and set a folded packet of papers on the table. These were in my father's things, he said. Copies of old bills, work orders. My grandfather kept them. I don't know if they matter legally. Nora, who had arrived just after Lydia and was removing her glasses, reached for them. They matter historically. Jonas gave a short nod, as if that was as much as he could manage. The room held many kinds of value now. An instrument that might be worth millions. A woman who had walked away from prestige and taught broken adults how to listen. A house built on music and unpaid labor. A retired sailor who needed money badly enough that doing the right thing could not remain clean and simple. Warren sat down at the table. For the first time since Calvin's visit, he looked openly at the auction card on the mantel, then at Marlow. The dog's muzzle had gone gray beneath the chin. His injured shoulder was tucked carefully under him. He was watching Warren, not demanding, not judging. That was almost worse. Marlow would accept whatever Warren chose. That was the trouble with loyalty. It did not tell a man when he was wrong. It simply stayed close enough that he had to tell himself the truth. Warren picked up the clipping of Celia Arden's listening circle. He imagined selling the violin and explaining it neatly. Conservation, medical bills, restoration, stability. All true. Then he imagined Celeste's instrument disappearing into a climate-controlled room where its story would become a paragraph in a catalog. Also true. He set the clipping down.
"I don't know what the right answer is," he said. Mabel looked at him. "That's better than pretending you do." Nora nodded. The law rarely gives moral clarity. It gives boundaries. Lydia added, "History gives pressure." Jonas looked toward the damaged ceiling. And roofs give deadlines. Despite himself, Warren gave a quiet laugh. It did not last, but it loosened something. Outside, snow began again, light and steady. Warren stood and walked to the window. The greenhouse sat behind the house, broken and bright under the falling white. Beneath it, the little stone room had kept the violin safe for decades. Not for profit, not exactly for secrecy, for a future nobody had known how to name. He touched the face of his old naval watch, thumb moving over the scratched glass. All his life, responsibility had come with orders, ranks, consequences. This was different. No one could command him into the right choice. No one could absolve him from the cost of it either. Behind him, Calvin's card sat on the mantel. Beside it, Lydia's clippings lay open. Between them rested the life Warren had walked into when he bought a house nobody wanted. He turned back to the room. "We keep researching," he said. "No sale. Not yet." Nora wrote it down. Lydia exhaled softly. Mabel gave a single, satisfied nod. Jonas said nothing, but he did not leave. Marlow lowered his head back to his paws, as if, for the moment, that answer was enough. Warren knew it would not remain enough forever. The roof would not wait. The bills would not wait. Pain did not wait simply because a man wanted to be honorable. But for that afternoon, in the cold dining room of Whitcomb House, Warren chose delay over impulse and responsibility over relief. It was not a solution. It was the first honest shape of the problem.
Nora found Evelyn March in a record that had almost nothing to do with ownership. That was the first thing she said when she called Warren. "It will not solve the legal question," Nora told him. "I want that clear before anyone becomes poetic." Warren stood in the kitchen of Whitcomb House with his phone pressed to his ear, looking at the frost gathered along the inside edge of the window. Outside, the old greenhouse sat low and broken beneath a new skin of snow. "What did you find?" he asked. "A witness. Not to the violin's transfer, not to the Whitcomb estate. To Celeste Armand herself. Or rather, Celia Arden." The name still felt strange to Warren. Celeste sounded like a woman in a photograph beside a fireplace. Celia sounded like someone who had carried groceries, paid rent, taught lessons in rooms with bad lights and folding chairs. "Who is she?" Warren asked. "Evelyn March, 78. Lives at a small assisted living home near St. Albans. She appears in a local arts newsletter from 1976 as one of Celia Arden's adult students." Lydia found the reference. "I tracked the current address." Warren looked toward the main room, where Marlow slept near the fire, one paw twitching faintly in a dream. "She remembers her?" She says she does, Nora replied. At her age, memory can be complicated. But she recognized the name Celia Arden immediately. When? This afternoon, if the roads stay clear. Warren waited. Nora heard the hesitation. Mr. Hale, I am not telling you to base a legal decision on a memory. I am telling you that paper records have edges. People sometimes remember what paper leaves out. That was enough. By early afternoon, Warren's truck was moving north through a corridor of white fields and dark pines. Lydia sat beside him with a folder balanced on her lap, her chestnut hair tucked under a wool hat, her scarf wound high against the cold.
Mabel sat in the back with Marlow, one hand braced against the door, the other resting near the dog but not touching him unless he chose it. Marlow had chosen it, 10 miles back. His chin now rested lightly against Mabel's knee. She looked down at him. You know, I don't usually allow men to get comfortable this fast. Warren glanced in the rearview mirror. Mabel raised an eyebrow. Dog's different. Lydia smiled faintly, then returned to the papers in her lap. The road narrowed as they left the main highway. Snow lay bright over open pasture land, and the sky had the pale shine that sometimes came before another storm. Warren had learned enough of Vermont weather to distrust beauty when it arrives too cleanly. The assisted living home stood near the edge of a spruce wood, a low building painted soft yellow with white trim and windows full of winter plants. It did not smell like a hospital when they entered. It smelled of lemon cleaner, wool coats drying on hooks, and soup from a kitchen somewhere down the hall. A woman at the front desk directed them to a sunroom. Evelyn March sat near the far window with a blanket across her lap and a book, open but unread, in her hands. She was small, smaller than Warren expected, with white hair pinned loosely at the back of her head. Age had thinned her face, but not dimmed her eyes. They were blue and bright, and when she looked up, Warren had the odd sense that she was not measuring his size or age or clothes, but the noise he carried into the room. Marlow stopped at the doorway. Evelyn noticed him first. "Oh," she said softly, "you brought a gentleman." Warren looked down at the dog. "Most days." Marlow stepped forward slowly, polite as any visitor. Evelyn held out her hand, palm down, patient. The dog sniffed once, then lowered his head under her fingers. "He has old work in him," Evelyn said. Warren's throat tightened unexpectedly. "Yes, ma'am." "He does. So do you." Mabel gave a quiet cough that might have been a laugh. Warren did not answer. Lydia took the chair nearest Evelyn. She introduced herself, then Warren and Mabel, and explained carefully that they were researching a woman who had once used the name Celia Arden. Evelyn's hand stilled on Marlow's head. "Celia," she said, not like a question, like a door opening inward. Lydia leaned forward. "You remember her?" "I remember how she taught people to enter a room," Evelyn said. Warren looked at Lydia, but Lydia only waited. Evelyn smiled faintly. "Most teachers begin with posture, bow hold, scales. Celia began by asking us not to apologize to the chair." Mabel folded her arms. "That sounds like a woman worth meeting." "She was." Evelyn looked toward the window where sunlight lay over snow like thin silk. "She had a way of making damaged people feel less dramatic about being damaged. That was a gift. Some people make pain feel like a performance. She made it feel like weather. Something to respect, something to dress for, not something to become." Lydia removed a copy of the old clipping from her folder and placed it on the small table. "Is this her?" Evelyn did not reach for it immediately. Her hands trembled slightly, not from uncertainty, but from age. When she finally touched the paper, her fingers moved over the image as though over a familiar passage of music. "Yes," she said.
Older there than when I first knew her. But yes, Celia Arden. Did she ever mention the name Celeste Armand? Evelyn's expression changed. It did not close. It deepened. Once, she said. Maybe twice. Not as a secret. More as a coat she no longer wore. Warren sat across from her, careful not to crowd. Did she talk about Alder Creek? Evelyn turned her bright eyes on him. Are you the man who bought the winter house? The question surprised him. Yes. Then you should know she never hated it. That sentence quieted the room.
Marlow lowered himself beside Evelyn's chair, still within reach of her hand.
She called it the winter house? Lydia asked. Evelyn nodded. Never by its proper name. She said there had been a house in Vermont where music sounded beautiful and behaved badly. Mabel murmured, That tracks. She said people there loved what she could do before they understood who she was. Evelyn's mouth curved with old sadness. That is a lonely kind of admiration. Warren looked down at his hands. Evelyn continued. But she also spoke of someone named Thomas. Not often, never carelessly. She said he had tried to save her from sorrow by making decisions she had not asked him to make. Warren thought of the letters in the tower. The line returned to him. I have been unkind in the shape of kindness. Did she want the violin back? Lydia asked. Evelyn took a long breath. Outside, a cloud passed over the sun, and the light in the room cooled. She once told me, Evelyn said, that she had left a voice behind. I asked why she did not go get it. I was young enough then to think every loss could be corrected if one only bought a bus ticket. A small smile touched her face. What did she say? Warren asked. She said, some things cannot return to us until we stop needing them to prove who we were. No one moved. Evelyn's hand found Marlow's head again, fingers resting between his ears. Later, she said, the house might need the violin more than she did. I did not understand. I thought houses were wood and stone. But Celia did not speak of places that way. To her, rooms could become lonely if nobody told the truth in them. Mabel looked toward the floor. Warren felt the words settle in him, not as an answer, but as pressure. Evelyn told them what she could. Celia had taught adult beginners in community halls, church basements, veterans' homes. She was strict about tuning, but gentle about failure. She hated applause when it came too quickly. She told students that music was not a ladder to climb, but a room to enter. Some nights, veterans sat in the back and did not play at all. Celia let them stay. She used to say, Evelyn said, a song cannot save a life, but sometimes it can keep a person here one more night. Lydia looked down at her notes. Mabel turned toward the window. Warren heard the sentence in a place beneath thought. He had never been saved by music, not in any clean, dramatic way, but he had been kept here by smaller things. A dog's warm weight against his leg, a task waiting in the morning, a house too broken to leave. Men survived on reasons that did not look heroic from the outside. Nora had sent questions about Eleanor Whitcomb, and Lydia asked them carefully. Evelyn did not know Eleanor, but she remembered Celia receiving letters returned in bundles, tied with string. She remembered one winter evening when Celia had sat after class with an envelope in her lap and said, some women spend their lives guarding doors they were never allowed to open. Eleanor? Warren asked. I think so, Evelyn said. Celia did not blame her as much as I expected. That made me angry at the time. I wanted villains. Young people often do. Celia said villains are convenient because they let everyone else go home innocent. That sounded like Celeste, or Celia, or the kind of woman Warren wished he had met before he learned so many things late. By the time they left, the sky had lowered. The first flakes came before they reached the truck. Mabel looked up. "That's not nothing." Lydia checked the weather on her phone, and her expression tightened. Storm warning moved up. Warren helped Marlow into the truck. "We'll get back before it gets bad." They did not. Halfway to Alder Creek, snow thickened into a white wall. The road lost its edges. Wind pushed across the open fields hard enough to shake the truck. Warren slowed to a crawl, shoulders steady, eyes narrowed on the dim tracks ahead. Beside him, Lydia stopped checking her phone when service disappeared. In the back, Mabel muttered advice to the weather in language that would have offended a less confident Storm. By the time they reached Whitcomb House, the road behind them was nearly gone. Nora's car was already in the drive, half covered in snow. Jonas's roofing truck sat behind it. 2 local men from town had taken shelter after coming up to help secure the porch tarps. Calvin Rourke's dark sedan was angled near the pines, elegant and absurd under a rising drift. Mabel stared through the windshield. "Of course, Boston gets trapped here too." Inside, the house was crowded in a way Warren had never seen. Not full, not warm enough for that, but occupied. Nora stood near the dining table with her coat still on, sorting papers into a bag in case they had to move anything away from a leak. Jonas was hauling firewood from the side room. The 2 townsmen were reinforcing plastic over a broken window. Calvin stood in the parlor, his tailored coat dusted with snow, looking less irritated than a man in his position had a right to be. "I came to discuss preliminary conservation options," Calvin said when Warren entered. Mabel shook snow from her hat. "You got a blizzard instead. Happens." The storm took command by evening. Wind struck the house in long, rolling hits. Snow hissed against the windows. Somewhere upstairs, a shutter banged until Jonas and Warren climbed up and secured it from inside. The power failed just after 6, though the house had so little working electricity that the loss felt almost symbolic. They gathered in the main room because it had the hearth. People who had spent weeks circling one another now shared blankets, coffee, soup heated over Warren's camp stove, and the awkward intimacy of being unable to leave. The violin remained in its sealed case, moved farther from the windows and placed on a table Lydia had inspected twice. For a long time, no one mentioned it. Instead, they listened to the storm. Marlow did not like the wind. At first, Warren thought it was the pressure change, or the cold in his shoulder. Then, a loose strip of metal outside began to knock somewhere near the greenhouse. Irregular, hollow, too much like a signal buoy striking steel in rough water. Marlow's body tightened, his ears flattened, his breathing changed. Warren saw it immediately. He sat down beside the dog, one hand settling on his back. "I've got you," he said. Marlow remained rigid. Another clang came through the walls. Warren felt his own chest answer before he could stop it. Harbor alarms. Ice against hull. A night when a rescue call became static and metal, and men shouting over wind. He pressed his hand more firmly into Marlow's fur. Maybe he was steadying the dog. Maybe the dog was giving him permission to admit he needed steadying too. Across the room, Evelyn's sentence returned to him. "A song cannot save a life." Lydia, who had been watching quietly, stood. "I would not normally suggest this," she said. Nora looked up at once. "Then perhaps do not." Lydia almost smiled. "Only a few open strings, no pressure. No tuning beyond what is safe. The instrument needs voice assessment eventually, and the room needs something besides that noise." Calvin's attention sharpened. "That is risky." "So is letting everyone sit in fear of a piece of loose metal." Nora hesitated. "Can it harm the violin?" "I will not play it if I think so." Warren looked at Marlow. The dog's body trembled once under his hand, though he made no sound. "Do it," Warren said. Lydia opened the case with more care than ceremony. No one spoke. Even the townsman near the window turned. The violin looked darker in firelight, older and less like an object than a witness. Lydia checked the seams, the bridge, the strings. She did not tune it fully. She lifted it gently, set it beneath her chin, and drew the bow once across an open string. The note came out rough, not broken, rough, as if clearing its throat after a long sleep. Then another note, warmer. Then two together, barely music, more breath than song. The room changed. No one gasped. No one wept loudly. The storm did not stop. The metal still knocked outside, once, twice, then vanished beneath the sound. But something in the room loosened. Marlow's breathing slowed first. Warren felt it under his palm. Then his own shoulders lowered. Lydia played only a handful of notes, a fragment that might not have been a melody at all. Yet it filled the damaged room without asking permission. It moved past Jonas with his hands raw from cold, past Mabel with her jaw set against feeling too much, past Nora, who had built her life around careful language, past Calvin, who understood value, and for one moment seemed to forget price. When Lydia lowered the bow, nobody clapped. That was right. Applause would have made it smaller. Mabel spoke after a long silence. My mother said Eleanor used to stand in the hallway when music played. Never in the room, just outside the door. Jonas looked toward the dark hall. Why? He asked. Mabel shrugged, but her voice was softer than usual. Maybe shame? Maybe habit? Maybe she thought guarding something meant she didn't get to enjoy it. Jonas said nothing. The anger he carried did not disappear. Warren could see that. It should not disappear so easily. But it shifted. It stopped being a wall and became something with a door in it. Calvin broke the silence with care. This is a beautiful moment. Mabel's eyes narrowed. He lifted a hand slightly. I mean that sincerely. But beauty does not repair roofs. Sentiment does not ensure a rare instrument. A moving story can still end in mold, theft, or bankruptcy. The bluntness should have ruined the room. It did not. Because he was right. Warren looked at the violin in Lydia's hands, then at the buckets near the far wall catching meltwater from a leak Jonas had not yet reached. He looked at Marlow, finally lying down, head on his paws, eyes half closed. He looked at the people gathered in a house built to separate them, and now forced by weather and circumstance into the same circle of firelight. Kindness would not fix the roof. Money would not restore dignity by itself. Both truths stood in the room. Warren rose and crossed to the mantel, where Calvin's card still sat beside the torn recital program from 1947. He picked up the card. Calvin watched him. For 1 second, Warren imagined saying yes, not because he wanted to be rich, because yes would be clean, simple. A signed paper, a number, a transfer, a roof repaired, Marlow treated. Responsibility converted into funds. Then he looked at the violin case. A private collector could preserve it. But preservation was not the same as return. Warren set Calvin's card back on the mantel. I won't sell it to disappear, he said. Calvin's face remained composed, but something in his eyes changed. That is not a final answer. No, Warren said. It's the first line I'm not crossing. Nora looked at him. Then we need another structure. We find one. Lydia nodded slowly, as if she had been waiting not for certainty, but for direction. Mabel leaned back in her chair. About time this house worked for more than itself. Jonas looked from her to Warren. And the town? Warren met his eyes. The town, too. If we can make it honest. The storm pressed against the windows. The fire shifted low and gold. No one pretended the problem was solved.
No one pretended the decision would be easy tomorrow when the bills returned with daylight, but something had been chosen. Not an ending, a refusal. The violin would not be treated as a prize pulled from a dead house. Not by Warren. Not if he could help it. Later, when the room quieted and people settled wherever blankets could be spared, Warren sat on the floor beside Marlow. The dog slept at last, his body warm against Warren's leg. The old stiffness eased for the moment. Warren kept one hand on his back and listened, not for danger, not for orders, for the storm, for the house, for the faint memory of a rough violin note still hanging somewhere in the beams. Whitcomb House had music in it again. Only a few notes, but enough to change what silence meant. After the blizzard, Whitcomb House did not wake as a changed place. It woke as a damaged one. The morning was painfully bright. Sunlight hit the snowpack and filled every window with a white glare. The storm had left drifts high against the porch, sealed the road in soft ridges, and pressed ice along the greenhouse frame until the broken panes looked rimmed in glass lace. Inside, the main room smelled of smoke, damp wool, coffee, and old wood warmed by too many bodies gathered too close to one fire. People left slowly. The two local men from town went first, after Jonas dug their truck free with Warren's help. Calvin Rourke's sedan needed 3 men, a shovel, and a great deal of quiet judgment before it moved. Nora stood on the porch with her document bag hugged under one arm, issuing instructions into the cold, as if weather itself might respect proper procedure. "Nothing leaves without a record," she told Warren. "Not the violin, not the letters, not the photograph. I'll draft temporary custody language today." "Today?" Warren asked. Nora adjusted her scarf. "The law is less impressed by snow than people think." Lydia, wrapped in her wine-colored scarf, looked toward the room where the violin case had been placed after the storm. "And I need to start the formal conservation report. We cannot keep calling this a rescued instrument and then treat it like a house guest." Mabel, carrying a box of tools to her van, snorted. "That house guest is behaving better than half the living." No one laughed loudly. They were all too tired. But something passed between them. A small warmth that had not existed before the storm. Not friendship exactly, not agreement. Something less sentimental and more useful. The knowledge that they had sat through a hard night together, and nobody had walked away unchanged. Warren watched them go from the porch with Marlow at his side. The dog's shoulder was stiff again in the cold. He stood anyway, looking down the hill as each vehicle disappeared between the pines. When the last engine faded, the silence returned. But it was no longer the same silence that had greeted Warren on his first night. This silence had footprints in it. Over the next weeks, the solution arrived in pieces, none of them dramatic enough to feel like an answer while they were happening. Nora built the legal frame first. She called it a temporary cultural custody agreement pending full provenance determination, then admitted, when Mabel stared at her too long, that ordinary people might call it not selling the thing while we figure out what it is. Warren signed more papers. So did Lydia. So did 2 representatives from the County Historical Board, who came up the hill in matching winter coats and spent 15 minutes admiring the fireplace before Nora reminded them they were not there for charm. The violin was formally documented, insured on a provisional basis, and moved only once, not to Boston, not to a collector, but to Lydia's conservation studio in Burlington for assessment under controlled conditions. Warren rode with it. He sat in the passenger seat of Lydia's car while Marlow lay across the back, and the violin case rested inside a padded transport crate between them like a quiet 4th passenger. Warren did not speak much on the drive. Lydia did not force conversation. At the studio, she showed him the humidity monitors, the locked storage, the workbench where the instrument would be examined without haste. "This does not make the decision for you," she said.
I know. It only keeps the decision from being made by neglect. That, Warren thought, was a good enough beginning. Marlow's appointment came 2 days later. The specialist outside Burlington confirmed what Warren had feared and half denied. Old ligament damage, arthritis beginning in the joint, pain made worse by cold and overuse. Surgery might not be necessary if they managed it carefully. Physical therapy, medication, controlled exercise, warmth. Warren listened to the treatment plan with the same seriousness he had once given operational briefings. Marlow sat between his boots, calm, as if the discussion concerned someone else. When the estimate came, Warren did not flinch visibly. He waited until he was back in the truck, door closed, heater fighting the cold, before he pressed his thumb against the scratched face of his naval watch. "You are expensive," he told Marlow. The dog leaned his head against Warren's knee. Warren exhaled. "Yeah, worth it." The money became the hardest part because it refused to become simple. Calvin Rourke returned once, not as a villain defeated, but as a man who understood timing. He came on a clear afternoon, when meltwater dripped from the eaves, and Jonas was working with Mabel on temporary supports in the tower room. Calvin's shoes were less polished this time. Alder Creek weather had taught him humility at the ankles. "I hear you have entered a custody arrangement," he said. "Word travels fast," Warren replied. "Instruments with possible histories like this do not travel quietly." They stood in the parlor, where the walls still needed repair, and one section of ceiling remained open, exposing lave and shadow. Calvin looked around with the expression of a man calculating costs without moving his lips. "You know the market would respond strongly," he said. "Perhaps more strongly now, with the Celeste Armand connection and the teaching history Lydia uncovered." Warren did not answer. Calvin continued. "Rare things draw money because people fear there will not be another chance to possess them." "That sounds like a warning." "It is more of a confession." Calvin removed his gloves slowly. "I make my living around desire dressed as preservation." Warren looked at him then. There was no smugness in Calvin's face, only a kind of polished honesty that still made Warren cautious. "I'm not selling it to disappear," Warren said. "You said that during the storm." "I meant it after sleeping." A faint smile touched Calvin's mouth. "Then I will offer a different piece of advice. If you will not sell, create a structure strong enough that the violin cannot be pulled apart by sentiment, local politics, or your own finances." "That almost sounds generous." "It is practical. A weak, noble decision fails faster than a selfish, competent one." Warren disliked how true that felt. Calvin left his card again before going. "Should you change your mind," he said, "the market will still know how to find you." Warren kept the card, not because he intended to call. Because Calvin was right about one thing. The world outside the hill had not become gentle just because Warren had drawn a line. Money would keep speaking. Desire would keep dressing itself in reasonable clothes. Keeping the card reminded Warren that kindness without structure was only weather. The name came from Evelyn. Nora had arranged for her statement to be recorded by video. Evelyn sat in the bright sunroom at the assisted living home, her white hair pinned back, a pale lavender cardigan around her shoulders. She spoke slowly, sometimes pausing to recover the thread. But when she quoted Celia Arden, her voice sharpened with memory. At the end, Warren asked if she thought Celeste would have wanted the violin displayed under her old name. Evelyn smiled. "Names are doors," she said. "She used more than one because she lived more than one life. Do not lock her back into only the first." That sentence stayed with Warren. So did another. "She loved winter rooms," Evelyn added. Small rooms where people came in cold and left less alone. 2 days later, Nora wrote the phrase on the top of a legal draft. Celeste Armand Winter Rooms. Not a museum, not an auction vehicle, a cultural trust. The violin would remain under professional conservation and limited use guidelines. Its full provenance would continue to be researched. It could not be sold to a private buyer without unanimous board approval and public notice. It could be loaned for limited performances, educational programs, and fundraising events tied to adult music therapy, veterans recovery, and the preservation of Whitcomb House as a community space. Nora built the walls. Lydia built the care plan. Mabel built the actual walls. Jonas came back every morning. At first he said little. He worked on the tower room with Mabel, repairing the warped shelves, stabilizing the window frame, replacing damaged boards with matching wood where he could.
Warren tried to pay him from the first small grant Nora helped secure, but Jonas held the check without folding it. "My grandfather's name," he said. Warren looked up from the invoice. Jonas's jaw worked once before he continued. "If this place is going to list people who mattered, I want Henry Bell listed. Not as a donor, not as some nostalgic footnote. As a carpenter who kept the place standing and wasn't paid right." Warren nodded. "Done." Jonas seemed ready for an argument and did not know where to put himself without one. "I still want the check," he added. Mabel barked a laugh. Warren smiled. "Good. You earned it." That was how the first wall of names began. Not with Whitcomb, not with Celeste. With the people who had built, cleaned, repaired, cooked, carried, tuned, swept, listened from hallways, and left no portraits behind. It was Mabel who carved the temporary plaque from maple scrap. "This house remembers those who kept it standing." Below it, in careful letters, she added, "Henry Bell, carpenter." Jonas stood before the plaque for a long time when she finished. He did not say thank you. He touched the name once with the back of his fingers, then went upstairs and worked until dark. By late winter, the house had not transformed. That mattered. The east roof was repaired well enough to survive the season. The main room had working heat most days. Plastic still sealed 2 windows. One wall remained unfinished, showing its patched bones. The greenhouse was stabilized but not restored. The tower room was safe to enter, though still cold near the glass. It was not a miracle. It was a start. The first Saturday night gathering was supposed to be small because Nora insisted on the word pilot. Lydia insisted on limited conditions. Mabel insisted on nobody sitting under that ceiling patch. And Warren insisted he had no idea how to host anything. The town came anyway. Not all of it. Enough. A few older veterans from 2 towns over arrived in a county van after Lydia contacted the music therapy organization. Evelyn came with an aide, wrapped in a cream shawl, her small hands folded around a program printed on plain paper. Nora sat near the side aisle with a pen in her hand until Mabel took it away. Jonas stood at the back, arms crossed, pretending he was only there to monitor the roof. Calvin did not attend. But he sent a note through Nora. "A structure is only as strong as the people willing to maintain it. I wish you stubbornness." Warren read it twice, then placed it in a drawer. The main room looked unfinished because it was. The chairs did not match. Some came from the church basement, others from the diner, a few from Warren's own salvaged rooms after Mabel deemed them structurally trustworthy. The windows had frost along the lower edges. One wall smelled faintly of fresh plaster. The fireplace burned low and steady. Marlow lay on a thick, new bed near the hearth, positioned so he could see the front door. He wore no vest, no working harness, only his old leather collar. The fur beneath his chin had gone silver in the firelight. Every so often, his left ear tilted when a new person entered, and Warren would glance over automatically. "You're off duty,"
Warren told him. Marlow watched the door. Right. Advisory capacity. Lydia arrived last with the violin. She did not carry it like treasure. She carried it like responsibility. The room quieted as she opened the case. Before playing, she spoke briefly. Not about value, not about makers or auction records. She spoke of Celeste Armand, who became Celia Arden, of Thomas Whitcomb, who tried and failed to be kind in the right way, of Eleanor, who guarded what she could not fix, of Evelyn and the adult students who had come to music not to become brilliant, but to remain whole. Then she looked toward the back of the room where Jonas stood. And of those who built and repaired this house, while others received the applause. Jonas looked down immediately. Mabel did not let him escape the moment. She clapped once, deliberately. Others followed. Not loud. Enough. Lydia lifted the violin. This time the instrument had been checked, stabilized, and prepared for a brief performance. Still, she played carefully. The first notes were warmer than during the storm, though still carrying an old grain in the sound, something weathered and human. It was not perfect. That was why Warren trusted it. The melody was simple, drawn from a fragment found among Celeste's later teaching papers. Nothing grand, a winter tune, almost a hymn, almost a lullaby, but not quite either. The room listened. Not politely, hungrily, but quietly. Warren stood near the rear wall with Marlow at his feet. He watched Evelyn close her eyes. He watched one of the old veterans press both hands on his knees as if steadying himself through the notes. He watched Jonas stare at the floor, jaw tight, while Mabel looked straight ahead with tears she would deny later if anyone valued their safety. When the last note faded, no one clapped at first. The silence after it felt earned. Then Evelyn whispered, "Yes." That was what broke the room open. Applause came, hesitant, then fuller. Lydia lowered the violin, and Warren saw in her face not triumph, but relief. The instrument had not been revived for spectacle. It had been allowed to speak where it had once been silenced. Afterward, people lingered. They drank coffee from mismatched mugs. They read the temporary wall of names. They asked about Celeste, about Celia, about whether the room would open again next Saturday. Nora answered practical questions. Mabel corrected someone who called the house restored. "Surviving," she said. "Restored is a big word." Warren stood near the door, letting warmth move past him into the entry hall. A man arrived late, just as snow began again. He was old, older than Warren, with a sailor's stoop in his shoulders and a navy watch cap pulled low. His coat was cheap, but carefully brushed clean. He stood on the porch as if unsure whether he had come to the right place. "I heard," he said, voice rough. "There was music here. Quiet kind." Warren looked back into the room. Lydia was packing the violin. Evelyn was laughing softly at something Mabel had said. Jonas was showing a veteran the plaque with his grandfather's name, though pretending not to care whether the man looked closely. Marlow had lifted his head from his bed. The old sailor noticed the dog. Marlow rose slowly. For a moment, Warren thought the dog would simply observe. Instead, Marlow walked to the doorway, sniffed the cold air around the man's boots, then gave one slow wag of his tail. The old sailor's face changed. Not much. Enough. Warren opened the door wider. "Come in," he said. "Fire's still going?" The man stepped inside. Snow blew lightly across the threshold before Warren closed the door, but he waited a second longer than necessary, letting warmth spill out into the night. Whitcomb House had not become a place without problems. The roof would need more work in spring. The greenhouse waited like a question no one could afford yet. The trust would bring meetings, disagreements, forms, inspections, and people who thought Warren had been foolish not to take the money. Marlow would have good days and stiff ones. Warren would still wake before dawn, sometimes listening for alarms that were no longer there. But the house was no longer only a burden. It had become a room with a door that opened, a place where names could be spoken, where music did not belong only to those seated closest to the fire, where an old dog could recognize another tired soul and decide he was welcome. Warren stood at the back of the room as the new visitor accepted a mug of coffee and sat near the hearth.
Marlow returned to his bed, keeping the door in sight. Lydia closed the violin case with both hands. The fire shifted gold across the unfinished walls. For the first time since he had left the Navy, Warren did not feel like a man trying to disappear with useful work. He felt like a man assigned to keep something open. Not forever. No man got forever. But for this winter, for next Saturday, for whoever came up the hill cold and left less alone.
Sometimes healing does not arrive like thunder. Sometimes it comes through an old room warmed by fire, a forgotten song played again, a faithful dog resting beside us, or a door opened for someone who needs a quiet place to sit. Warren did not find peace because every problem disappeared. He found it because he chose to care for what had been forgotten. And in doing so, he was cared for too. Maybe that is one of God's gentlest forms of grace, not always giving us a new life all at once, but leading us back to the broken places and showing us they can still hold light. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories of hope, loyalty, and quiet miracles, please subscribe to the channel. May peace find you where you are, and may you never forget that even the coldest rooms can become warm again.